Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are very pleased that you could join us this evening for what we think will be an extremely interesting presentation. I am Susan Glassman, a co-president with Ruth Ayersman of Women's Voices Raised for Social Justice. Before we begin, I want to urge you to visit our website, womensvoicesraised.org, to learn about upcoming programs and opportunities to get involved. And I'll mention just a few, and all of these programs for the foreseeable future will be conducted virtually. On January 27th at 6:30, the Racial Justice Book Club will discuss Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates. On February 3rd at 7 p.m., the Racial Justice Movie Club will view and discuss the politics of racial resentment and the cost to mental health with Jonathan Metzl, the author of Dying of Whiteness. And on Friday, February 19th at noon, there will be a lunch and learn with Missouri State Senator Brian Williams. You can register for any of these programs on our website, womensvoicesraised.com. I am particularly excited about this evening's program, The Politics of Funding Preschool Education. There is widespread agreement that high quality, accessible, and affordable early childhood education is perhaps the most important thing that we can do as a society and as a community to build toward social and economic equity. We have two expert speakers tonight. I'm very pleased that they're with us. The first speaker will be Linda Rallo, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. She has been involved with education advocacy for more than 20 years. For the past 4, she has been the vice president of Aligned, where she oversees education policy and legislation in Missouri. She has been focused on early childhood education and workforce development. And Rich Patton served as the director of Voices for Children at Risk for 20 years, and he's been a research associate at several research institutes. He is currently the author of Hearses and Bandwagons, a blog that addresses urban and social policy issues in our region. And if you are not already a subscriber, I urge you to become one. One more thing that during Rich and Linda's presentations, please feel to type any questions that you may have using your chat function on your device. Our program chair, Nancy Nix Rice, will facilitate the Q&A portion of the program, and she will get in as many questions as time permits. Thank you very much and enjoy the program. And Linda, you're up first.
Great, thanks, Susan. Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and share with you what we know. Just to give you a preview, I'm gonna just talk about early childhood on the ballot across the country and show you some initiatives and how they fared. And then I'm going to kind of get into just a little bit about like the Prop R in St. Louis and how that worked out and what those dollars will be used for. And then talk a little bit about like what the tools in the toolkit that we have are for financing early childhood. And then Rich is going to kind of get into more, where do we go from here and what kind of a path do we take forward? And again, I'm just going to try to keep my portion relatively brief so that there's time for questions. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And this little bar up here. Okay, hope you all can see this. I just love graphics. So anytime I have an excuse to put something cute, I do. Early childhood on the ballot. So what I did right after the election in November is just kind of reviewed all of the initiatives around the country to kind of see how they did. And it was very interesting. So I'm going to show you the results. So here are all of the initiatives that I found, not St. Louis, because I have a whole special section for that, but everything passed for the most part, except for one initiative in Oregon, which kind of surprised me that it failed because I always think Oregon is kind of a progressive state that really supports these things. And I even went in to the news in Oregon and scoured to figure out what it was that, was there like a big anti-campaign, and there wasn't. And so it's a mystery and I still haven't figured it out. But what I think is really interesting, and if you look over here at the percentages, you can see that most of them were, or they all were, up in the 60s and above, and even as high as 73% in San Antonio. What's interesting about San Antonio is, you have normally, like, there's always about 33% or so that's a no, just because there's always that group that is a no on everything. But this was a reauthorization. And so they proved, obviously, that their early childhood is doing well, that obviously they've got a lot of support in the community. And that's really important, especially when you have initiatives that have maybe a sunset or reauthorization, that you really demonstrate the success. So I think that's a really good sign that they have that strong of support for something that's been around. But you can see all of the different funding vehicles. Colorado used a tobacco tax increase. You've got property taxes, income taxes, sales tax, marijuana. That's always, it's at the very bottom. And the interesting thing about cannabis is that a lot of people think it's just like going to be bringing in, unlimited amount of money, but it really, it's not as much money as you think. This one's $250,000. So kind of suggests that maybe that's not the best tax to go after if you really need to raise a lot of revenue. The things that, property tax is pretty popular for a tax because it's, more, the distribution is pretty even. Sales taxes can get challenging because of the regressive nature. But again, you have a lot of options, and, you can see the varying amounts of money that was raised. And but I think all in all, if you look across the country, we're really making a lot of inroads as to people really understanding the value of early childhood. So that's exciting. So now just go a little bit about what happened in St. Louis, which was a good thing. So it was St. Louis City, and it was Proposition R to fund early childhood. And it was a small increase in the Children's Services Fund. They had a little bit of authority left, and so they were able to use that and raise $2.3 million a year as the projected amount. And that will go into the the Children's Services Fund will be handled by the St. Louis Mental Health Board, and then they will be the body that is overseeing the distribution of the funds. And the great thing about having an entity like this, the Mental Health Board, that's been around, it's trusted, they're already doing work in the community. So it really helps the voters understand, like, if they like it, they trust giving them a little bit more authority. And so I think that really helped the initiative too, when you're not creating a whole new thing, but something that the voters really value. So I'll go into a little bit on the results. Rich had a really cool map, but I couldn't find it in my slides, and I didn't want to bug him because he had it all mapped out. But I went through the wards and just looked at the totals, and it, oh shoot, sorry. I have to move my little camera because I can't see everything here. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. What's interesting, it's you can kind of see the wards that had the most support, which is a lot of the more wealthier wards, I would say, and some of the wards with more poverty had less support. And I don't know exactly the reason because I didn't run the campaign, but I would just suspect that, the sales tax burden is going to be a little bit harder on a person with, fewer resources. So maybe there's less support. But generally, an average, it was 56.26, which is really great. I mean, when we do polling on early childhood, if you can get up into the high 50s on your polling, that usually suggests that you're going to be successful. In a lot of times there's the no campaigns that will drive that number down. So I would imagine, I didn't see the polling they did, but their polling probably had them up even higher. And, as the election came out, that's the number. But that's a great amount of support that makes you really feel good that this is something that the community wanted. And if you have questions, just holler, I suppose. So I kind of went through to see who supported Prop R, and the Alderwoman Hubbard was the real champion that got it through the board, and that is wonderful. And they had a lot of strong endorsements. There was a Yes on R campaign that provided the coordination, and then they had great number of endorsements. So I tried to break them up by subject type. So if you look at all the elected officials that were on board, that's awesome. And then you had a nice supply of childcare centers that really, back up the I don't know, I'm just like really reinforce how the money's going to be used and why that's a good idea. And then all the organizations. And then what I really thought was interesting, I loved all the neighborhood associations that got behind it. And that just like shows a lot of support, obviously, from the community, and then strong endorsements from both the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the St. Louis American. And I know that I think it was the St. Louis Public Schools maybe took a board vote, then they had some issues with it, probably because there's just this underlying belief that anything with for education really should go to schools. But obviously the campaign demonstrated a strong, commitment across the community. So they were successful. So that's a really nice set of endorsements. I think they should be really proud of themselves for that. So it's 2.3 million estimated annual amount of revenue that will come in. And so the timeline will, obviously last November, they passed the tax. So they need a whole year to collect that revenue. And then in July of 2022, they'll start issuing grants. And so it seems like a long way off, but it'll be here before you know it. So that's pretty great. And the way that the revenue can be used, so the St. Louis Mental Health Board will be deciding how to invest the funds. They sort of have to stay consistent with the statute that exists, which is the Children's Services Fund statute, which basically says the money has to be used towards prevention programs or services that strengthen children and families. But you can make the case, obviously, that, early childhood programs strengthen families. So I think they'll be able to direct some of those funds towards education. It just can't go to public schools. So I know it's up to the board to determine. I guess they'll, I don't know all the details about how exactly the grant process will work, but it's my understanding that it will be able to help out childcare centers. And I think they have some innovative plans that, from what I learned, through the CARES Act distribution, they learned better ways to kind of get money out. And I think some interesting things will be coming down pike in the future. So I'm pretty excited about that. So before I get into the tools of government, I don't know, I don't see the chat, but Susan, if anybody has questions about the campaign, we want to pause for a second. I know there might be somebody on the line that could speak to some of these things about Prop R in a little more detail. I'm happy to take a break for a second if you want to address that.
Nancy, have you observed any questions on chat yet? I haven't seen any come up yet.
Okay, well, we can even wait till the end. That's fine too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I tried to think of everything that we have at our disposal. So I'm going to start with some things that we can do at the state level. Right now, we have a little bit of funding in our foundation formula for pre-K, and it was passed in 2018. Well, it was put in statute, I think, in 2014 or 2015, and it basically allows for school districts to claim up to 4% of their free and reduced lunch population and draw down additional dollars and use that for pre-K. It was a piece of legislation that was sponsored by Representative Swan from Cape and Representative Wright from Columbia. And it was really their idea of trying to find a way to fill the gap between, you've got Head Start, and then you've got families that can afford, their own pre-K. And there were these families, they called them in the donut, that they were kind of too rich for Head Start and too poor to pay for pre-K. So the idea was that this 4% would fill that gap. The initial fiscal note, I think when they made the additional call to the formula, was an additional $42 million for the whole state. Not a ton of money, but something, and a move in the right direction. So I think now that we've got 2 years under our belt of districts claiming the money, we're realizing that we need a little bit more because we're not able to fill the complete need. So one of the ways you can get more revenue is just to increase that pre-K allocation. So instead of claiming up to 4% of your free and reduced lunch, you can add language into statute that would say up to 6, 8, 10. And there's a bill that Senator Arthur from Kansas City filed, and that it does just that. It incrementally brings it up to 10%. And so we're hoping that with just those 2% increases, it won't be such a big bite. a big hit to the revenue, that maybe the legislature would be open to it. And that's kind of what I'm keeping my fingers crossed of this year, is maybe we can get that bill moving. It has been referred to committee, which is a great sign. So we know we'll have a hearing soon, and we're pretty excited about that. Other things, there are these economic sales taxes across the state, and not all, they're available to counties and cities. Not every county and city uses it. Some do, some don't. But if you have, it is that authority that's available. So if a community wants to pass that, they can go through an initiative petition, or they can get their councils to pass legislation to enact a little bit of that economic tax. And I think it can be quite considerable. Another thing that's available is just to go back to the legislature, kind of like with the Children's Services Fund, and say, hey, we would like to have a designated tax authority for early childhood. Greene County, where Springfield is, they've been working on this for a few years, and they've been trying to get a sales tax for early childhood. They've got big champions down there. Senator Lincoln Huff, it is like a top priority of his, and he got it over the finish line last year, which was amazing. But it was in a big omnibus bill that got vetoed by the governor. So he has to start all over again. But he has filed the legislation, and he will be pushing that forward. But that is just for Greene County. So we were thinking, like, why can't we have something like that for every county? And it's not official yet, but I'll give you a little preview. Representative Brenda Shields, she's from St. Joe, and she's a huge early childhood champion. In fact, the speaker's like, you're all things early childhood. She's kind of driving the bus on that. She's considering maybe coming up with like a tax, like a property tax that she can enact that would be available to every county. So I'm watching to see if that gets filed. She said she was going to file it this week. I can tell you what's going on in Jeff City. There's some news that just came out with COVID, and so things may be slowed down, but I think that's a really exciting opportunity. So I will be working really hard to see that through. Other things like tax credits and tax deductions, those don't give you a big of a bang for the buck, but they are looking at things like giving maybe, childcare workers special tax credits and things like that, to at least give them a little bit more relief. Cigarette taxes, I could talk for 5 hours about cigarette taxes, because we tried to do one and we were not successful. They're pretty hard in Missouri. You can go through the legislature, which I would say you have a 1% chance of getting that done, because they have a pretty strong lobby there. Or you can, do what we did, initiative petition, but they're pretty tough too. I did see something where there's a legislator from, I forget his name, but he's up near Iowa, Illinois, that little corner, and he's trying to pass like a cigarette tax just in their community, because obviously they get a lot of traffic. So those are revenue generating opportunities. Social impact financing, I don't know a ton about it, but I think the concept is like, you kind of promise that your program works, and then if you can prove that it works, you get money from government through like the savings that you create by efficiencies. There are a few places that have tried that. And then you've got your bond opportunities. I think with bonding, and then you see this a lot with school districts. It's tough because the wealthy districts have a really easy time like floating a bond issue and raising money. And it's areas where you don't have that great, base of tax, that it's really hard to do that. So there's some equity issues, I think, in some of those things. Private activity bonds, shared services, you're not going to get a ton of money, but if you get a group of like childcare centers to get together and say, hey, we're going to consolidate our back offices, maybe we're going to, do purchasing together. There are ways that they could maybe get a little more bang for their buck. It's not going to be a ton of money, but it is revenue. And then special assessment financing. So those are everything that I could come up with. If I missed something that you all know about, please speak up. But I would say, like, out of all those things, I'm personally excited about increasing the pre-K allocation in the formula, because that money, once it's in the formula, it's so protected, and you can't just come and like line item it out. And so it just becomes an obligation of the taxpayers. Like, that we're paying for education. People don't really complain about K through 12 because it's just something that we do. And so making our system not a K through 12 system, but a K through 12, I think is really easy, and it makes sense. And so I I love that revenue option. The other thing we've been talking about is, we have federal money that comes in, we have our state money, and we should have an ability for local communities to get involved too, because if they decide as a local community that this is something that is really important to them and they want to invest in, we really think that they should have that opportunity to do that. And that's kind of what Springfield has done. They've worked as a team down there to really want this sales tax. It's just been really hard for them to get it passed in Jeff City. So it would be great if we could just get something done for everybody. And then it's really up to the community. They don't have to pass it if they don't want to, but they have an option. So I think that's a really great way to go as well. I guess that's the end of my piece. I'm happy to answer questions as I get ready to get Rich's all teed up. So give me 1 second. Oh, that's me again. Hold on. Rich, oh, you're down here. I was all ready for you. Okay. So I will just let Rich say next slide or something like that, and then we'll be good to go. And I'll try to be quiet.
Great, thanks. And I appreciate, I was unconfident of my ability to smoothly operate the slide deck on the thing. So Linda volunteered to do it. I appreciate that. And a quick note before I start on the Oregon proposition that did not pass. Deb Patterson, who'd been here with the Deaconess Parish Nurses, was just recently elected to the state Senate in Oregon. She might be able to fill us in on the dynamics out there. I like you thought of Oregon as progressive, but I think it's a little more schizophrenic than that. I think it has progressive parts and not progressive parts, but we could check with Deb to find that out. So let me launch into this presentation here. I think the title is perfect. That's Linda's title, suggested title. We started out with something that was a little loftier, with truth and justice and the American way and beauty and all kinds of things. But like virtually everything else in life, I think this game, the early childhood game, is ultimately about politics / relationships and money. So I think Linda put us on target. On the next slide is simple and straightforward. So what's the goal if we are pursuing early childhood as a public policy issue and as an education issue and as a justice issue? The goal is straightforward. It's to provide high quality early childhood education for all St. Louis area children. And I guess I would add a note to that we need particular focus on kids who do not have access to that traditionally and who benefit the most from access to those kinds of programs. The funding need, this is not my number, it's WePower's number, but I have no reason to doubt it, is that in addition to what's currently expended on early childhood from all the various sources, we need an additional 1.3 billion in the St. Louis area to hit that goal, to provide high quality early childhood education for all kids. That's a big number. You have to put a lot of coins in the piggy bank to get to that number. But I think it's a reasonable one and a goal that's realistic we need to shoot for. So if we look forward, what do we do going forward on the next slide in the city and county specifically? So as Linda indicated, and I see that Jama's on the call, she can speak to this. In the city, we need to make effective and equitable use of the approximately 2 million, I think $2.3 million that will be generated by Prop R that passed in November. As Linda indicated, and Jama knows, and indeed is the one that does, the mental health board that administers those funds is skilled and competent and has a long history. So I think we are well advised to be confident in their ability to do that. And they are always open to people's ideas and things. So I think we can work with them and be in communication with them as that money goes into place in the city. St. Louis County, a little trickier. I think we started out there with parallel efforts in the city and county with the hope of parallel efforts. And in St. Louis County, the notion was for a property tax that would generate about $80 million annually. That's also a pretty big number and a pretty impressive number. That effort encountered some problems getting off the ground in terms of opposition from some corners, a lot of questions about who would administer the funds, what the money would be spent on. So I think that was wisely pulled, set aside for the time being. And the big question, I think, for the county is what's next? How is that pursued? Where do we look for locally generated money there? Joey Saunders, I can see from We Power, is on the call. He might be able to speak to that as to what, if anything, they have in mind at this stage, if they know, and what the options are for generating the money. Does it have to be a tax? Can we look to other sources of revenue sharing? I don't see Emily Koenig Smith on the call, so I would suggest that one of the ideas that's been floated is using some of the money from the Children's Services Fund in St. Louis County to support early childhood. So that's something we might look at. I would say that with a little more hesitancy if Emily was on the call, but that's a route that might be pursued. And then jointly, if we look at the St. Louis area, the St. Louis metropolitan area, or at least the core of the area, the city and county, figure out how to combine the locally generated funds and a blended funding stream with revenues from other sources. And Linda had run down a list of those possible sources. I think it's fair to say whatever is generated locally compared to the federal government or the state will be a smaller amount. So that will put the local players less in the driver's seat than some of the other players with bigger bucks. So where's the money on the next slide? Where's the money that we need come from? And I will go through this list quickly because it repeats. Certainly, traditionally, we've looked to families to pay for early childhood. And early childhood was not that common. There were not, it was that one stage, that many women in the workforce. So there were not many families in the market, if you will. When that started to change, when we got into a dynamic where more families needed more early childhood, we quickly figured out that the cost of high quality early childhood, and I think anytime we say the term early childhood development or early childhood education, we need to immediately think about high quality in our heads. Bad quality or low quality does not do anybody any good. As we look to high quality education and more people got in the workforce and in need, we quickly figured out that it is virtually impossible for most families to afford the cost of high quality early childhood education. There's just too many resources that are required to go in. There are certainly benefits to the families, but there are broader societal benefits as well. So I think one of the things we need to look to is how to support that. The state of Missouri, most places, the state government is the primary source of revenue for early childhood education. Missouri has lagged behind, I guess is the gentle way to say that, and there's more about that later, so I will move on. Federal government has been a big funder in recent years, I guess we could say recent decades, with a variety of programs, with block grants, with Head Start, I think initially, with block grants, now with CARES money related to COVID and the interventions around that. Local school districts have provided early childhood in recent years as well. So they are a source of money. We talked about dedicated local revenues, Prop R in the city of St. Louis as an example of that. Businesses and corporations, also pretty new to the game, is the business case was made more strongly for early childhood education, the benefits that would accrue to business and corporations as it related to their bottom line, to the productivity of their workforces. They became participants in the process and contributors to the game. And philanthropy, God bless them, always there as the early childhood issue came on their screen. they have contributed to the process. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the politics. And I think it's fair to say that the early childhood industry, if we want to call it an industry, the culture of the industry, at least in Missouri and at least in St. Louis, has always been at best fraught, to pick a term, and possibly even contentious. Well, not possibly contentious, frequently contentious. I think the issue there may be is the old saw that the battles are so bloody because the stakes are so small. When you were pressed for resources in what you do, badly pressed for resources, you fight desperately to get those resources, to secure what you need to do to stay in business to serve your clients. And I think that's been particularly an issue in Missouri. I will tell a quick anecdote. When this light first went on for me many years ago, my wife and I have been married 51 years. When we were first married, my wife worked in early childhood, as she did for the rest of her professional career. And I worked for a governmental research institute that, among other things, did crime auditing. We would go out with the police department twice a year. We would literally seize dispatch tickets that looked like they might not have been handled right, go out with somebody from internal affairs, go to the crime scenes, interview the people that had been involved in the criminal activity. So my thought was, hey, I'm on the cutting edge here. I have the tough job. The more I heard about early childhood and the goings on from my wife, the more it struck me that that was the tough, treacherous part of the enterprise rather than the criminal justice part of the thing. So I'm offering a quote here that I think is on target for what we have encountered and will continue to encounter from a gentleman in Canada who is in combination, and I'm impressed just by his title. He is a philanthropist and a philosopher and an entrepreneur. Those things don't often go together. But here's what he says about working together or not working together. The jealousy says compete with each other, which we do. Envy says destroy each other, which I think sometimes we are often moved to. Empathy says help each other, and love says empower each other. And I think as we think through how to deliver high quality early childhood education to all the kids that need it, we need to go to that empower each other option and do what we can do for one another to make the thing work, to make the ball roll. So let's go, if we could, Linda, to the next slide. And the first thing is to get money in the pot. As I said, we had a big ask just in terms of the gap, a 1.3 billion gap to fill just in the St. Louis area. So here's the list of people. Again, a little revisit to it. I'll do a little more commentary about the possible sources of money. Parents and families, but few have sufficient income to cover the cost of quality care as it stands now. So we need to secure the funds, obviously, from them that we can by way of fees, but quickly look on to see how those fees can be supplemented. The federal government has been a big and positive player in the last couple of decades, I would say, in supporting early childhood. The issues there are in competition with other priorities, other public policy priorities. So you just can't say that early childhood is good. How does this stack up against environmental, against equity or racial justice, against climate change, against a whole range of a broad range of very legitimate needs? And the federal government is also juggling constantly evolving programs that are here sometimes, then disappear, then reappear, and things come along. The state of Missouri, I will be a little less sanguine than Linda about the state of Missouri, I guess, because I see the state involvement to some extent largely in the rearview mirror, and she's down there working every day when things have happily started to change to some extent. But the state of Missouri has, criminally may overstate it, but maybe not. They have invested minimally in early childhood programs over decades, decades and decades. Ranked at the bottom of everything in terms of early childhood investment, usually 48th or 49th or sometimes 51st or 52nd. Now you say to yourself, no, there are 50 states. How could they rank? Because the territories, some of the territories invested more in early childhood than the state did. And also with fragmentation in the state and issues with coordination between agencies, they had some problems pursuing funding from other sources in a coordinated fashion. I think there are some signs that things are starting to change there a little bit. There was some announcement from the government today about the way they will handle the subsidy program and the monies attendant to that. Linda reported right before we went on the call that she was in Jeff City today in an event where there was some broad spread support for early childhood and related issues. So maybe we've turned the corner, but we have a long distance to cover. Local dedicated revenues, again, a little bit of the problem that you have with the federal government and I guess the state government as well. You're trying to generate revenues for cash-strapped jurisdictions. St. Louis City, if we talk in local terms, would be an example. And if you stop folks on the street in St. Louis and ask about priority issues, I think you'd hear about economic development first and crime first, and I'm not sure what else. But we've got to push early childhood development up into that list of priorities for folks. School districts, well, I'm not sure what to say here. I think we will see with the state that school districts are going to have a bigger role in early childhood development, all aspects of that going forward. There's been a little bit in the past competition between K-12 programs and early childhood. I think a little bit different philosophical view of what those things were. I know folks that worked in early childhood often said that schools did not understand that K-12 education was different than early childhood development. If only the fact they operate on different schedules. If you provide early childhood development, you have to do that on some version of a if not a 24-hour a day, at least a working schedule hour a day and year-round basis. School districts have not tended to operate that way. They operate on a school day model, and if that goes on, then you have to find more childcare during the day. If you send your child to a school district or an early childhood program, and you work until 5 or 6 at night, what do you do with that child after school gets out? Private sector, we have not had coordinated investment in St. Louis compared to many other places. Places like Minneapolis and Boston have invested, businesses and corporations have invested more at a systemic level. The interesting dynamic there is they've quickly figured out that they do not have the resources in terms of philanthropy and corporate contributions to fully support or adequately support or substantially support an early childhood system. So in those places that did that, the business community quickly turned to put pressure on the state government to pick that up. And we've not had that dynamic. Minnesota would be a good example that is where they have picked up in the public sector the cost of early childhood. And then philanthropy, I don't think under the best of circumstances, philanthropic organizations usually have sufficient resources to support something at the systematic level, early childhood system, if you will. And frankly, we have a little problem here in St. Louis with the money available from the philanthropic community and losing many of our Fortune 500 corporations. I think we have half of what we had a couple of decades ago. And some of our big funders in and outside the corporate sector, like Anheuser-Busch and the Danforth Foundation, there's just not a huge pot of money there anymore to draw on. The next slide talks about the money outside, the allocation. If we get this money, if we can drag this money into the pot, what are the resource needs? Who do we need to support and what do we need to do with the money? We talked about parents. We need to secure resources to cover the cost of care. We need to make it affordable. Child care providers, and I'm talking about the people on the ground, the teachers and the assistants. Almost unbelievably, those folks are the lowest paid workers in any industry. If you want to make as little money as possible, become an early childhood teacher or an assistant in an early childhood center. An interesting, ironic, unfortunate juxtaposition of things that when we're looking to the care of our most precious asset, our children, to the folks we pay the least. That does not make sense. So we need to figure out how to increase the income of those folks and give them resources attendant with the tasks that they're carrying out. Early childhood programs, a lot of things they have to do, they have to meet to provide quality programs. First of all, quality. Just because you're in business does not mean you have a quality program. And there are a couple of levels of assuring that, but all of those things attendant to providing quality care require money. Meeting regulations, even those just no more than reasonable, almost minimal regulations that the state require money to do. And then you have to meet the needs of high need families who often have more needs, different needs, more complicated needs. Kind of three levels of the program. So early childhood agencies, early childhood centers, I guess we might think of them. They need to cover all of the costs that are set out above there, particularly when there's a need to improve quality. Home providers, folks taking care of children in their homes, have a little bit tougher road to hoe in meeting the cost of quality care and covering all the required cost. So they have similar needs. And then school district, we talked about just a little difference in the type of model they've traditionally operated and what they're being asked to do and what they're attempting to do now. Let's go to the next slide if we could, Linda, and talk about how early childhood and social justice advocates.
No, it's not. Oh, we go. Sorry.
There we go.
Here.
How they can move the agenda forward. And again, looking at the participant list, I think we have mostly and primarily folks that fall in those categories of early childhood advocates and social justice advocates. So step one is promoting understanding of the critical importance of early childhood for both individuals and communities, our individual children and societies. I think often when the general public thinks about the benefits of early childhood care, they think about it serving individual children, which it certainly does. And there's a ton of data on the benefits that accrue from kids who get high quality early childhood education in terms of higher educational attainment over the course of their life, higher home ownership, higher income when they're employed, less use of the supportive systems, less need for compensatory education, but also the community benefits are huge in terms of not having to meet costs, support costs related to things like the criminal justice system and compensatory programs. We need to set early childhood development as a top public policy priority. And we talked about this a little earlier in some of the specific jurisdictions. You can't do everything good at once. And I know folks who are progressive often had that temptation, but we have to look at early childhood as a priority vis-a-vis many, many other good things. And since good things tend to cost money, we have to decide which of those go where on our priority list and what gets pushed to the top. Support specific initiatives promoting quality early childhood development. Certainly some of the local efforts to generate revenue for early childhood, like Prop R that we talked about, and like something to be done in the county we talk about. I know Pam Mitchell, who I see on the call, is working with some smaller groups at the very local level to bring high quality early childhood education to them. And then finally, and I think this is critical, and we tend to think past this, help elect candidates who are early childhood advocates and supporters. What we do, the priorities we set, and the funds that we allocate are usually done by public officials, and budgets reflect our values. And it's those public officials, executives who propose budgets, and legislative bodies that approve those budgets that we need to look to support early childhood. And again, Linda had some good news, I think, earlier on in the session about her time in Jeff City today and some movement there. So let's jump to the final slide, and I will wind this up. All of this is damn hard, and we have to eventually figure it out. And we've been at it a long time. I mean, we've been at it at least decades. So here's some things that I think we might do to move this forward. Keep the focus on kids, especially those who will benefit most. I think when we get deep in the discussion, the kids get moved to the back. We talk about regulations and childcare providers and quality and school districts and the legislature. We need to, in the back of our minds, to know the kids are the main concern and need to be our primary focus. Foster understanding of early childhood investment for individual kids and communities. I referenced that before, but I think the James Heckman research and the research of some of the Federal Reserve banks, like in Minneapolis, show pretty clearly that the highest return on public investment, comes from investing in early childhood development. We need to use that to our advantage. We need to build on past efforts that have worked in the St. Louis area, things like 24-1, and the Normandy area, the TEACH program, Parents as Teachers, Nurses for Newborns. So when we see success, we need to follow up with sustaining that success and pushing it forward. And then keep at it, play the long game. We've been at this a long time. We need to sustain the efforts until they're effective. And apparently this race, the early childhood race, is not a game that goes to the swift, it goes to the persistent. So I will stop there and see if there are questions to Linda or I or anybody else. Thank you, guys.
I'm gonna see if I don't know, I'm trying to stop. Oh, hang on. Is my screen still sharing?
Yes.
Your screen is sharing, yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure how to unshare it.
Is there a low, or let's see.
I don't know. Well, you can just look at my screen, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Nancy, are you ready to?
I am. There are several questions in the chat already, and those of you who have additional questions, by all means, share them with us. In a sort of short form answer, several people have inquired about the bill number and the name of the sponsor of said bill that would incrementally increase the foundation formula for preschool. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I haven't memorized the bill numbers yet. Unfortunately, it's too early in the session, but it's Senator Lauren Arthur. Since I'm not sharing my screen, I could look it up real quick for you.
Okay, sure. If you want to, you can break back in with it, or you're welcome to type it in the chat, and then everyone can pick it up from there as well. We also had a question about how county tax increases for this use might play out in terms of rural or poorer counties being in an inequitable position. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think they would surely be in an equitable position because they have fewer resources. So someplace like St. Louis County or Jackson County on the western side of the state, St. Charles County, certainly, if you look to draw revenues from those individual counties, they would be relatively well positioned. If you get into poorer counties in outstate Missouri, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. So there is almost a built-in inequity there that has to be figured out. And I think that's where we would look to the state government and the federal government.
Because they've done such a good job so far. So I had an experience recently where I was in a anti-bias discussion group, and one of the participants asked the question, so I live in blah, blah, blah suburb and I pay huge property taxes. Are you honestly telling me that my taxes should go to support schools in other parts of the city that aren't as, that aren't as affluent? And one of the other participants in the group said very calmly, yes, I am. And this person, by virtue of his stature, was able to actually make a pretty persuasive case with just those few words. For those of us who are possibly not as poised to be influential, I wonder if either or both of you would share just a 1 or 2 sentence elevator pitch, if you would, that we could use to help people around us understand why that would be the right choice, where it is indeed legitimate to ask.
Well, just off the top of my head, I mean, we all, if we're going to fix a road, not everybody drives on that road. But it's like a commitment we make as a people that, we want to have safe roads and bridges. And some people use the bridge more than others, but that's just something we do as a people that it's a shared value. So I guess I would say early childhood education is just a shared value that we all invest in.
Yeah, I would give a similar answer. I guess I would say a rising tide lifts all boats. We all live in the same community. We pretend in St. Louis particularly like we don't. We've got all kinds of boundaries. But functionally, operationally, we're all in the same place. So if your kids go to a school district and get a good education, and there are a lot of kids that don't, the kids that don't, they don't participate in the economy at the same level. They don't become good employees for your company. I know the Centene guy, and I'm blanking on his name, just raised the issue. Yes, thank you, Susan. Raised the issue of having qualified employees in St. Louis. He raised issues about crime. If kids don't get what they need in early childhood development, they are much more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. So we need to quit pretending, even though we have all these boundaries, like we live in separate communities. We live in the same community. The dynamics cut across all of those things. Everybody needs to do well for all of us to do well.
Excellent answers that we can pattern our responses on. Thank you very much. Another question was about the impact that COVID and so many people trying to work from home and school their children at home, how that dynamic has potentially influenced community expectations and community opinions about the whole issue of education equity broadly and early childhood in particular.
I think anybody could answer that. I would defer to Linda or Ruth. I see Ruth down there. I know Ruth addresses that issue to some extent.
I hope I understand the question, but what I'm really concerned about, just because of the pandemic, is we have so many anecdotes right now. And so depending on who you talk to about, how people were able to work and not work, it's different across the board. But we still have about 60% of our workforce that doesn't have the option of working virtually. And so that is something that we got to remember. Like, someone might have a good experience. I was at a senator's office today, and he's newly elected. He had his daughter there with him. She looked to be about 10, and she is working remotely, but they have that ability to like move around. And so I I just think we have to be careful that we don't make policy off of anecdotes as we think about what to do, and to try to at least use some data and be gentle with policy making, because I think people are going to take advantage of the situation on whatever side they're on, and use the things that have happened as the way to sell their idea. And I'm not sure I answered your question, because I'm not sure I completely got it. So if I missed something, I'm happy to add a little bit.
What I was really asking was whether you feel that just there has been so much conversation around education challenges, and wondering if you think that has helped move the needle on broader community awareness and concern around these issues.
Yes, definitely, especially around like teacher pay, teacher recruitment, retention. The pandemic has been especially hard on teachers. And so I think the populace is really starting to feel their pain a little bit, and trying to, especially families that have had to like take that role. And just like the inequities in education. So if you are a family that has means, and you have a nice computer and reliable Wi-Fi, and parents that are excited by your education, it's easier to kind of get through this. But for families that lack any of those things, those kids have been really lost. And I think folks have really understood the losses that are occurring and the harm that's being caused. And so I think while I was in Jefferson City this week having lots of meetings, everyone was very receptive to, education policy. And I think there is an opportunity, because it's in the front of everyone's mind, that maybe we can do a few things down there.
Well, good. Hopefully, maybe that can shorten up this long game at least a little bit. One quick final request in the chat is to ask, is it Jama Dodson? Did I say it right?
Jama.
Thank you. For an update on the implementation of Prop R.
I think Linda pretty much got it up to date, because we just spoke yesterday, I think it was, wasn't it, Linda? Not much has happened since she and I talked. The whole thing about it, we're collecting the tax in 21, so we won't even have the money until it starts to flow into our into our bank account. And we start getting some amount late November, then December, and then it's usually kind of starts to dwindle down and pretty much finishes by April. So, and our fiscal year is July 1. So I think we'll be able to have a grant call in the fall of 21. Did I say 21 before? I meant to say 22. So we'll have a grant call, notice of grant availability in fall of 21, and then we'll be able to make our first grants in starting July of 22. So I hope I didn't confuse that. I think I was saying 21 too much, but but it will take us a while to collect the money, and in the meantime, I think that we're putting together some ideas for we've just put together. We're going to be hiring another staff person, or at least another resource to help us with reaching out to the early childhood providers that are out there. One of the things we discovered by doing I think I mentioned this to Linda, one of the things we discovered when we were giving out CARES dollars this last spring, where there are a lot of these very small home-based and community-based providers that are not, they're actually technically for-profit organizations, but they make very little money. And I know there were many cases where we heard about some of these people, these owners had not even taken salaries for themselves for a really long time, so that they could keep the children of the parents that they knew so well and wanted to keep these kids safe. So we're thinking of putting together an initiative where there would be some resources for attorneys and CPAs so that they could get approved to become nonprofits if they wanted to. That there's no downside for doing that. And they would be more eligible for different kinds of grants, but they would also be more eligible for our grants, because the one thing about the statute that was different from the federal CARES dollars is our state statute requires that we give to nonprofits. So as many nonprofits as we can get to be in that category, we'd like that to be the case, rather than being limited only to those that are right now nonprofit. And it would not be an expensive, I don't think it would be a super expensive thing to provide, getting that paperwork filled in for people to get those nonprofit status. I can't think of anything else that Linda didn't already say. We're just starting to really get organized. As I said, we're going to be hiring a new staff person. We've done a little bit of restructuring. We've added some financial accounting services so that we make sure we have a good financial house when the money starts to flow, that our financial oversight is strong. And I think that's about all I can say that wasn't already presented. Linda did a good job.
Well, I think everyone has done a wonderful job, and thank you for bringing up that element about nonprofit status. I don't think that's something that if it floated by before, I certainly didn't catch it. So thank you very much. One remaining question in the chat, and then a comment in the chat. The question was, are there projections on how the decrease in, about the extent of the decrease in tax revenue due to COVID, and how do we anticipate that's going to impact how much money is available through Prop R?
Ours is a property tax, so it's probably not going to have a huge impact, I wouldn't think. We don't anticipate it being. I've been with the organization 9 years, and through every kind of things that have occurred since 2012, we've only fluctuated maximum 2% up or down every year. So it's pretty stable funds.
Great, thanks. And then I'm just going to read this last comment because honestly, it's more than I can skim and wrap my head around. If folks want to stay engaged and updated with ECE organizing, advocacy, and policy design efforts in St. Louis City and County, you can sign up for updates in the link that's in at the bottom of this comment in the chat, and check out the playbook that Rich mentioned in his presentation, authored by a diverse array of impacted community members with the input of more than 1,000. So it sounds like a terrific ongoing resource. And
Nancy, I will add, since we're plugging our little efforts, I put out a weekly newsletter during session, kind of recaps what happened in Jeff City. And so some of those bills that we talked about, we track them every week. So if anybody isn't already receiving that and interested, they can shoot me an email and I can add you to our distribution list. You can, I don't know, it's linda@wearealigned.org, or I'm sure Susan can maybe follow up with my email address.
that was linda@wearealigned.com.
.org. I'll write it here.
.org. Sorry.
No, you're fine. And yeah, I'll just put you in that. We just have a little constant contact, and then if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe.
So we are incredibly grateful for our two speakers and our additional experts from the audience, and to Susan and I believe Laura for putting this program together. Obviously an incredibly important issue. Ruth, do you or Susan have a closing comment?
To Susan, and I just want to say thank you very much to Rich and Linda for excellent presentations. They worked hard on them. We talked about them a lot. The situation was evolving as they were preparing, and I really appreciate it. And Jama, I really very much appreciate your joining us. I know you had a sort of conflict.
Yeah, I thought I was going to have one, but I didn't. So it ended up.
It was really great to have you with us. So thank you very much. And thank you for everyone else who participated.
Thanks, Susan. And I'm just also stay tuned to the governor or Governor Parsons' State of the State address, which I think is during the last week of the month, barring any more COVID. The House has already canceled session for next week because they have a COVID outbreak, but he's going to really unveil all of the exciting things that he's been talking about and hinting about around early childhood. So stay tuned.
I just want to add one thing before we go, and that's to thank Susan Glassman. Susan was the contact person and really put this program together and worked with the speakers, and we appreciate all your effort.
My passion.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And for the speakers, the chat is now filling up with thank you, great program, terrific analysis, and other related kudos. So thank you again. And everyone have a safe and healthy rest of your week. And we'll see you at future programs, of which there are several this month.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Nice to see you all.
Thanks
Good
so
night.
much. Thank you.